Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion in our homecoming series as we revisit just the foundational teachings of the Redemption Church, going through the opening chapter of John's Gospel. And today we look at John 1, verses 15 through 17. Here's the text. John testified concerning him, about Jesus, and exclaimed, "This was the one of whom I said, 'The one coming after me ranks ahead of me because he existed before me.' Indeed, we have all received grace upon grace from his fullness. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." So this parenthetical in verse 15 quotes John the Baptist. It's John quoting John. John, the author of our gospel that we're studying, and then John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus and the forerunner to the Messiah himself, the one whose sole purpose in life was to herald the Messiah, fulfilling what was prophesied, and the tension-laden ending of the Old Testament about this one in the spirit of Elijah who would reconcile the children to their fathers and prepare the way for the Lord. John the Baptist, like Jesus, was not received by his own. In fact, he would wear camel hair and eat locusts and wild honey. And he was not received well by the Pharisees, and he didn't seem like the Pharisees himself. He would ask them, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? That's what John the Baptist would do when he saw the most respected religious leaders of his day. And he testifies to the light, as we've seen in this week's devotions, and he says of Jesus, "This was the one of whom I said, 'The one coming after me ranks ahead of me.'" So John is going before Jesus, so Jesus is the one coming after him. But rightly, John points out that he ranks ahead of me. So John the Baptist is very careful, like John, our author, to point out that he's not the light, he's not the Messiah, it's all about Jesus. And then the reason that John the Baptist gives in this quote in John's gospel is because of the pre-existence of Jesus. We saw this in verse 2. It's an important verse. He was in the beginning with God. The pre-existence of Jesus is thematic throughout John's opening chapter. And it's important because the original audience of John's gospel, and even some people today, still believe in the pre-existence of the soul. And John's gospel turns that on its head. Rather, the creative, reproductive faculty was commissioned to mankind. We were told, "Be fruitful and multiply, rule over the earth and subdue it." That was a commissioning given to us by God. And so when man and woman create a child, a soul foreknown by God before the foundations of the earth, comes into existence within time and will exist for all eternity thereafter. Right? So that Disney movie with Tina Fey, as funny as Tina Fey is not a place to get your theology. All right? The pre-existence of the soul, as taught, for example, in Mormonism, is not a truth about the condition of mankind. Rather, this is why, as Christians, we rightly revere, the lives of the unborn. We understand the significance of what happens when man and woman are intimate. A soul comes into existence. Now, there's more to say about that. That was a big deal in my dissertation. But what John praises Jesus for, and the reason that John gives for Jesus's superseding of his rank, is the pre-existence of Jesus. Because he existed before me, he ranks ahead of me. Now here he comes, the one coming after me. If you look at it backwards like that, maybe perhaps it helps you understand it, what John the Baptist was saying in this parenthetical. Indeed, now here we are back to this John, not John the Baptist, but John the Apostle. We've all received grace upon grace from his fullness. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. These final words will seem familiar because we just saw them in yesterday's devotion. He's full of grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. But here it's added with something that's really, really important. At the Redemption Church, what you'll find is that we largely hold to covenant theology. We believe that the Old Testament law is the foundation upon which the cross is built. We deny what is formerly known as antinomianism, the mode of teaching that would do away with the law, dismiss the entire Old Testament. Rather, we believe that Jesus is right in the Sermon on the Mount, as he rightly pointed out, not one stroke of the pen, not one letter of the law will pass away. God meant the Old Testament. It's the law. And now as New Testament believers, we understand what is sinful because of the law. By the law, we become conscious of sin. Paul writes this in the New Covenant. You can also I think we talked more about this in a recent sermon titled The 10 Commandments. So we received the law through Moses. And so if you live in the Old Covenant, you have God's promise through Abraham to create this nation. And through this nation, every nation of the world would be blessed. That nation was Israel. And Moses provides the law. So if you live and breathe and die under the Old Covenant, and you're a child of God, you're looking forward to the Messiah one day. The way that salvation worked in the Old Covenant was by believing in God's promise to Abraham, adhering to the law of Moses. In Romans chapter 10, Paul explains Old Testament salvation like this: you adhere to the law of Moses, the man who does these things will live by them. That's how people were saved before Jesus. They adhered to the law of God as given through Moses. At the Redemption Church, we believe that law is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We believe that Moses is the earthly author of all of them because Jesus would refer to those books and then quote those books, calling them Moses. So literally, Jesus believed it and I believe it too. That's what we teach at the Redemption Church. So God gave us the law through Moses, and everyone who lived and breathed and died before the turn of the millennia, when we go BC, right? We try to call it BCE. Secularists try to erase Jesus, but we all know what you're counting from, bro. All right? Literally, he broke history in half with his birth. And the Gregorian calendar contains no year zero. It starts with year one. It's the year that Jesus was born. And so everybody who was born and lived and breathed and died under the Old Covenant, as an Orthodox Jew, they had their faith in the Messiah to come. And then upon Jesus' work on the cross and his resurrection, the covenant changes. And now, as Paul writes in Romans, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Now, the righteous live by faith. So those who lived and breathed and died under the Old Covenant, ancient Israel, they were saved by the Messiah whom they anticipated. We as New Testament Christians are saved by the Messiah who has come and is coming again. Old Testament Jews were saved by the same Jesus in whom we believe. Their faith was anticipatory. Ours is in his resurrection, and we know that he's coming again. So, because of the law, we know where God stands on things. To believe that God gave the law through Moses, but now it's all about grace, and now God's having a better day, is an ancient heresy known as Marcionism, and the Redemption Church will never teach that. We believe that God still takes sin just as seriously today under the grace and truth of Jesus Christ as he did the day he inspired it through Moses in the Old Testament. Our tendency as New Testament believers is to mistake the grace of God, the patience of God, for license to sin. And to think, well, because God's just letting us get away with this stuff, evidently he's okay with it, is outright falsehood. It's not like God was having a bad time in the Old Testament, chilled out in the New Testament, and that's the reason for the difference between the two. No, that makes no sense, because it indicates a schizophrenic God who, by the way, according to Revelation, is going to flip out again and suddenly start taking sin seriously again. In the book of Acts, there's a story of Ananias and Sapphira who came and gave a gift to the church under false pretense, and for that reason dropped dead. That's in the New Testament. God takes sin just as seriously today, as he did the day he sent fire from Sodom and Gomorrah, fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah to consume the city in Genesis 18 and 19. He takes sin just as seriously today as he did the day he dispatched the flood in the days of Noah to just wipe humanity out and start over, saving just a few. It's not like God has changed his mind and is cool with sin. God still takes sin just as seriously today as he did in the old covenant. Just look at how severe the cross is. It's not that God's cool with sin. It's that the cross is just that magnificent in its atonement. So through the law, or through Moses, we get the law. And now we get grace and truth through Jesus Christ. At the Redemption Church, you can expect to hear covenant theology. Most of the teaching we do, in fact, is going to come from the Old Testament because, like I said at the beginning of the series, we're going verse by verse through the whole Bible. And most of the Bible is Old Testament. Every time we come from the Old Testament, regardless of what literary genre we're in, we're always going to point to Jesus, point to Jesus, point to Jesus. Through the Old Testament law and prophets and books of wisdom, we can see the foundation for the new covenant. And now, and because of Jesus Christ, we get grace and we get truth. That's what you can expect to hear more of at the Redemption Church. Lots of grace, lots of truth, both Old Covenant and New.